Hi there. I am your host and producer, Disa Safa. In this edition today, we'll be talking about the Russia-Africa Summit. And I joined by Kabbalah John, African Continental Unity Party Communication Strategist. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. A pleasure.
What's your reflection about this Russia-Africa Summit?
Well, it's first of all, it's in a geopolitical ideology or approach that the Russian Federation has adopted since 2019 on the first Russia-Africa Summit, which took place in Russia, which is all about to have a kind of a partnership, a close partnership, in the case of Russia, particularly with Africa, because as we know that the ones whoever who may be able to control Africa and its resources, he will be able as well to control the world. And Russia is in that dynamics of regaining its status as the world power. So for that to happen effectively, Russia has to have access to the mineral resources of Africa, just as the West entirely, as the Chinese, as the Americans, France, you name it, have been obviously controlling the resources of Africa. So it is in that guideline. But what is more remarkable is the approach of Russia, which is not based on purely imperialism, but it's based on cooperation with the so-called third world countries, which can allow them to find themselves and meet their aspirations, and at the same time be beneficial to Russia as well on its geopolitical agenda of regaining the status as a superpower. So that is exactly what has been happening. That's why we see Russia supporting some revolutions that have been taking place in that side of West Africa, like Mali, Burkina Faso. We see Russians really helping there to get rid of French army out of those countries and then begin to eventually fight the terrorism. So I think from this perspective, currently there's a lot of appreciations from our side or from the African side towards Russia. But we just need to be careful that this is a strategic move, is not a permanent position that Africa needs to adopt in relying always on aliens for its own problems, because we believe as Pan-Africanist revolutionaries, we believe that the solution for Africans must be initiated, must firstly be engineered and initiated by Africans, because there's no European mind or Chinese mind that can find a solution that African needs. Only Africans can find the solutions that they need. So that's basically, that is what is happening right now. We saw that the West has tried to fight a lot against this current summit by putting pressure on some African countries to not attend this summit, which is still a very good demonstration of imperialism, of West hegemony, especially the United States over African countries. Even though they're talking about democracy and sovereignty, they don't exercise that only when it's benefiting them. So this is generally what we can say in entrance for this summit. Thank you very much.
The event focuses on enhancing cooperation in the areas of development, security, and peace. How do you see this Moscow's ambition in dealing with the continent Africa?
I think that development, first of all, needs to be guaranteed by security means already implemented. I'm always thinking that we are rushing based on an ambition to becoming like Chinese or like, I don't know, France or other countries that we envy for their economic development. We are rushing to gain development, but we don't think about what we need to do to protect the economic development that we want to embrace or that we want to achieve, because we are living in a world where predatory becomes a means of operation. Those who have no capacity to protect themselves are the prey of those who have the power to invade and destroy. In 2011, We had an example of that where Muammar Gaddafi had lots of money by himself, but when the West, NATO, decided to invade him, he didn't have the military capability to defend himself. So I think when it comes to the issues of security, Africans shouldn't make a mistake to trust other people with their own security. That is something that we cannot allow ourselves to do. The moment we have the means, we have the capability to build our own security system, but the only thing that is lacking us is the unity and organization. If you check how much money we spend on military budgets annually, individually, it's a lot of money. In 2016, we were about 42 to 46 billion US dollars. Today is probably more than that. And if we can bring that money together for a continental military budget to protect and to secure Africa, we will be in a better shape as we speak now. And when we engage now with the Russians, it will be just for economic cooperations and maybe exchanging technical information or scientific cooperations. So when it comes to security, I feel like Africans, we need to take that on our own, because that is the heart of everything that we can do. We can never think of any long-term development if we have not developed first and foremost the means to protect and to defend ourselves. The issue in Russia and Ukraine right now, it's telling us exactly what that means. So that is how I see that. But when it comes to economic cooperation, as it's also being outlined, it's an important step that's obviously Africans head of states have taken, and we just expect. I mean, we just wait to see the declaration that will come out of this summit to eventually put our mind, in a right place, or focus our mind in the right place. But for now, I think that's what we can say. So in terms of food production is good, economic development, well, it's good, but security should be something that we deal with ourselves. We deal with it by ourselves as African people. We just need to unite and organize in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, and we'll be able to achieve it.
Okay. Trade, investment, security, grain supply, arms are the major agendas of the summit. In what way Moscow would cooperate with African nations with win-win sentiment?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, what is Russia doing now? I should say Russia, China, Brazil, India, and South Africa, but most in leading, looking at Russia and China, what they are doing now is about to transition the world into a new phase of multipolarity, whereby there's no one bloc that has a hegemony over the rest of the people, but the people must have alternatives, different alternatives for what it about solving their problems. So I am seeing Russia useful in that aspect of helping certain African countries to get rid of Western hegemony. I've just heard recently that Mali has gotten rid of French as a national language, or official language, I should say. So these are good signs of the cooperation between Russia and some African countries. So it is good. It's in a moment where the world is transitioning from one phase to another phase. It always gives room to other countries who have been oppressed for a long time to seize the opportunity and reposition themselves in a way that they will free themselves from the former oppressors. And this is at that moment that Africans shouldn't be really non-aligned as it was during the time of Cold War, because one thing we need to understand is that Africans have been for a long time fighting against the oppression of the West, in Africa. We have been fighting to end the oppression and the hegemony of the West in Africa. And when the West by themselves, or Europeans by themselves, are at a war, against their own oppression among themselves, it is an opportunity for us to then take a position according to what we have been aspiring to for a long time, which is to get rid of this oppression and liberate ourselves. So what is disappointing is to see that many African countries are declaring themselves non-aligned or neutral in this conflict. I mean, I'm not talking about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia precisely, but in this geopolitical conflict between the West hegemony and the emerging of other blocs that can eventually give some kind of multipolarity configuration to the world. So Africans must take position clearly, according to what we have been looking for a long time, to end American oppression and domination on Africa. So when we stay neutral, that means we admit that the oppression was good on us. So I believe that Russia can help Africa in this direction very much, as it has been doing in Burkina Faso, Mali, and maybe Niger, as we're speaking right now, as we heard there was a coup d'etat yesterday. So on that aspect of arms delivery, security aspect, that's very good. So in terms of trade, I believe that for trade to be beneficial for Africans should be able to develop also the capacity of production. Because if we are only the consumers, we don't produce. Even if we have trade agreements such as AGOA that we have, many African countries have with the United States, it's only benefiting the United States because they are the ones who are able to bring their produce in Africa, or their finished products in Africa, without having to face a lot of taxations, while Africans produce nothing almost, and they have nothing to import or to export to the United States of America. So the example is very simple. We saw how many African countries are crying right now because of the end of the grain deals that happened recently in Russia, when Russia obviously exited the grain deals. So some African countries were crying, especially Kenya. It was crying that is a stab in the back. Why don't we produce like food? Why don't we really produce that capacity or develop that capacity within ourselves in Africa? Even though we have 60% of the arable land in the world, we have the means to do that. We know that there were attempts in the past to do that, and precisely at Lagos Plan of Development in 1980, if I'm not mistaken, to develop agricultural means in Africa so that we can be the consumers of what we produce and the producers of what we consume. Unfortunately, that project was shut down by the Washington Consensus. By the Washington Consensus through the Structural Adjustment Program. The Western tried to shut down that project, right? So we went back to the square one, of course, went back to the square one where we had to depend on the West for the food that we want. And that's why we have even this reliance on small countries like Ukraine to produce the grains that we need in Africa. So I think this is a shameful situation. For the trade to be beneficial for us as African people, we need to develop our own means of production. We need to produce food. We need to produce things, finished good, not just raw materials. Because most of the leaders who went to this meeting, they are going there with the one aim, which is to give raw materials to Russians in exchange of money or in exchange of support, military or otherwise. But remember, raw materials, we are not the ones who determine the price of these things. It's still the WTO that determine the price of our raw materials, which is the Western-owned institution. So when we can go beyond the raw materials economy and begin to produce the things that we want, the finished good that can be consumed in daily life in Africa, then we'll be able to export the same thing also to Russia. Then that trade agreement will be beneficial to all of us as African people, as well as for Russian people. And that will be the win-win situation, as you pointed out.
Russian President Vladimir Putin Thursday addressed African leaders in attendance of Russia-Africa Summit, promising that Moscow will send up to 50,000 tons of free grain supplies to Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic, and Eritrea. And how do you analyze this?
Most of these things in some countries where there's a corrupt regime, those grains won't reach the poor people they will be used by those in power to sell them and make money. It has happened many times, even in the Congo during the time of Mobutu in Zaire. There were such humanitarian assistance that came through, that fell in the hands of the oligarchs in the regime, which didn't even reach the destination, which was the poor people. So I do agree definitely there. And I also think that this situation, we saw it during the COVID-19. We are seeing it now for food, that Africans should be always the people who have to live at the sympathy of other people, or survival of Africa depends on sympathy of the Western or other people. It's something that we definitely need to get rid of if we want to rebuild Africa as a global power base, because that's what we should be aiming for now. So eventually that calls for some Pan-Africanist mechanism that will allow us to put in place structures of food production for the whole Africa, and that is the only way we are going to succeed. So, but the action on itself is a good action. I know that America is using food and other assistance as a leverage to compel African countries to act in a way that America wants. But I don't know if Russia really imposes some kind of conditions for the food that it's about to give to those 6 African countries. So which shows really that Africa is, even though it has also an imperialistic vision, so to say, on its own, but it doesn't have the agenda of oppression and extermination as it has been carried out by the United States and allies.
Kabbalah John, you have asserted your argument that this Russia-Africa summit is quite different from the other relations. It's non-imperialistic sentiment in it. You've said earlier on. This one is not, the only one. We do have this U.S. Africa summit. We do have China Africa summit. We have this UAE and other France, Africa. There is these relations with a very untapped continent, Africa. What are the indications for saying this Russian-African summit is somehow better than the rest connections?
Well, let me first of all put it clear that if Russia was allowed to join NATO in the 90s when it requested, we wouldn't have a situation that we have today of Russia trying to help Africa to become like a savior of African states. The reason why Russia it has positioned itself in this perspective of trying to help African countries is because Russians find themselves kind of rejected by the fellow Europeans, and so the only way, not just rejected, but on that trajectory to be even, I should say, destroyed in terms of Russian civilization, they find themselves under attack with the NATO expansion. So therefore, Russia needs to find allies, and the better way to find allies is to position itself as a savior of those who are living under the Western oppression and Western imperialism. So that's the only way I say that this current summit is in the platform itself is not imperialistic as those platforms organized by the Western countries, whether you talk about France, whether you talk about America, whether you talk about, I don't know, England or whatever else that might be out there in terms of African and other entities outside.
Okay.
So that's the reason why, yeah.
The newly emerging political economic bloc, the BRICS, an acronym stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Kabbalah John, your country, South Africa, is one of the founding mother of the BRICS. How do you put it comparatively with that of NATO? I mean, the NATO counters BRICS ideologically, and the vice versa. How do you see the establishment of BRICS and contending with that of NATO's ideology?
NATO is a purely or importantly a military organization of predation to control the world, militarily speaking. So BRICS has more economic, orientation than military orientation. It may have some kind of a military aspiration there, which in long run may become more difficult. When you look at the structure of NATO, you see most of them are, white people, most of them Westerners. So with BRICS, you have a potential, you have a chance to have African countries, Russia, India, even Arab countries, which becomes a bit more difficult when it comes to military structurization or ideological aspect of it. So I don't see BRICS as a counterbalance to NATO, because NATO is mostly a military structure or organization. So BRICS is more of economic integration, and the most important thing that can happen with the BRICS is that the de-dollarization of the world currency, as we know that at the summit that will be taking place here in South Africa next month, probably one of the declarations that may come out of it will be a different currency. It might end up in a currency that will also impact the world in a different way. And you see there's already a BRICS bank that has been developed. So I look at the BRICS more in economic aspect of it. It's not in a military aspect as NATO is structured. But all in all, I think BRICS is a very good initiative, a very good one. It's actually a leading, I should say, a leading initiative in terms of creating a multipolar world where people have, as I said some times ago, some people have different alternatives. We cannot always depend on the Western hegemony forever. We must be able to find our own ways of expressing ourselves and pursuing our goals as African people and achieving them. So I think BRICS can be on the economic part of it, that aspect, that instrument allowing us to achieve those economic goals. But when it comes to military, we need to find our own NATO as African people, where we are able to defend ourselves and protect ourselves and protect our interests.
All right, Kabbalah John, thank you for your time. Dear viewers, thank you for being with us. See you next time with another edition. Bye-bye.